Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we are going to be diving in to the list that I'm going to bring into my game against my buddies Blood Angels tomorrow. So, did a video a little bit ago talking about how to counter and how to play against melee-oriented armies in Pariah Nexus, because as a lot of you guys know, it's actually very difficult to deal with a lot of the melee lists that are emerging in Pariah Nexus, primarily due to the fact that the deployment zones are so close together, and the board state, especially the terrain, is insanely in favor of melee type units who can kind of set up, or quote unquote stage, if you will, very easily in the first turn of the game, and give ranged units, ranged opponents, a really hard time because they can't see a lot of the units that they're, going to be shooting at. So there's a lot of issues with that. Now, one thing I will say is that luckily the Eldar do have some counters, but you can't build a traditional Eldar list as we were back in September and expect to be able to, go into Pariah Nexus and do very well against these different types of lists. And there's a couple reasons for this. One, a lot of the classic Eldar lists with multiple fire prisms and stuff, there's just some terrain layouts that just don't work with those units. And I love fire prisms. I think they're great. I think they're really good into, the meta that has evolved, vehicles and heavy infantry. Fire prisms on paper look great, right? But when you get into an actual game with them, 1 out of 3 times, you're going to have a layout that isn't favorable, especially when you're going against more competent opponents. You're not going to be able to have the success that you want with them. Now, as you guys know, my opinions on fire prisms are pretty much this. They're great in semi-competitive play. They're great at your local hobby shop. And depending on the tournament layouts in the tournament packet, they might even be good in certain tournaments. But again, if you can't get that line of sight, if you're seeing that, 2 or 3 of your games in a tournament are, games where you're not going to have any line of sight over, from one side of the board to the other, they're just not good. It's the same reason why a lot of players in WTC don't typically run fire prisms, because if you look at WTC terrain layouts, they're very dense, and it's very easy to hide big targets behind ruins. True line of sight is also a thing that you have to keep in mind. So, having said that, if you're going to go into a game running double prism, you might find some matchups a little bit difficult. On the same token, if you're building a list that is very shooting heavy, and it's looks like more of a traditional Eldar list with, maybe Avatar of Cain, your typical Warp Spider, Swooping Hawk kind of stuff, and you're kind of running a list in the same way as it was before the nerfs to several of our units, that, aspects that got their points increased, you might actually find that you're outnumbered. And because you're outnumbered, your models are going to not trade as well. You're going to be pinned in your corner, which happens also, and you're not going to have a good time, especially if you go second, right? Now, having said that, there are ways to mitigate this as an Eldar army, but you do need to think a little bit outside of the box, and you need to plan accordingly for that if you're facing a lot of Blood Angels, World Eaters, and stuff like that. Now, I will also mention that there's no shame to losing to melee armies right now as the Eldar. And the reason for this is because it is a very steep learning curve. Now, about a week ago, I played a game against my buddy who plays Ultramarines, and he played a more combat-oriented Ultramarines list. And with the melee army that I was running, for, the video I created about melee armies being effective against other melee armies, at least the Eldar ones, it did well. Basically, it checked all the boxes that I thought it was going to check. However, having said that, my opponent really didn't have a lot of specialized units that, are a problem in the meta right now, right? No Thunderwolf Cavalry, no, Death Company, nothing like that. So it really didn't fight anything that it couldn't kill, right? I mean, Harlequins going into aggressors, you just roll for devastating wounds and you just kill them. They're not that tough, right? You wound them on 5s normally at AP -1, and then you got you know, maybe you've Vrain in there with anti-infantry, or you got a Troop Master that's going to be doing devastating wounds, and giving the unit devastating wounds. You're just, you know, aggressors just don't really cut it, right? So there was an element to that, you know, there wasn't a whole bunch of challenges in my way as far as the melee units that I had. Now, tomorrow's game against Blood Angels is going to be a little bit of a different story. Now, to give you some background on my opponent, he's a decent player. Typically doesn't play Blood Angels, but because they're, you know, very strong right now, he decided he'd bring them out of retirement. And typically speaking, he used to run a very drop pod heavy Blood Angels army, but as you guys know, drop pods are not good right now. So he is going to be running probably more along the lines of something like, you know, Death Company, Assault Intercessors, you know, very fast, hard-hitting infantry. And that's going to be a little bit different than what my opponent was bringing with Ultramarines, which was, you know, he did have the Assault Intercessors and all that, but he also had aggressors. And I've never personally had a problem with aggressors, especially with the way I run most of my lists. I have Fire Dragons. Fire Dragons are so good into aggressors, it's not even funny. So, also aggressors are typically kind of slow and ponderous, you know, and I just, you know, personally speaking, I've never had much of an issue with them. Now, this is the army I'm going to bring, and basically this video is going to be revolving around what I'm going to bring to the table. It's not going to be a full melee list because I just want to kind of run something more balanced. I know that most people aren't going to be running super melee heavy, so I want to see if a balanced Eldar list without a ton of melee can be effective against this type of list. Now, I will address concerns about people who might be thinking about a full melee list against Blood Angels. I do think it's very doable. I just think that your positioning has to be very spot on, and you might want to get first turn if you're playing a melee-oriented army against Blood Angels and stuff like that, because it's going to be very helpful. Anyway, so what do we got in this list today? So I don't know exactly what my opponent's bringing, but more than likely he's going to bring a lot of Death Company and possibly, you know, Assault Intercessors, maybe some Inceptors, you know, a lot of fast-moving stuff, right? And Blood Angels, they like to just run right at you. They're going to stage up. They're going to have 2 or 3 units that are going to try to charge turn 1. And then they're going to have, you know, 2 or 3 other units ready to clean up whatever you throw at the first wave. So basically, imagine your opponent is going to bring in and try to charge you, try to eliminate some of the units that you're going to use to screen and stuff like that with cheaper stuff like Assault Intercessors, and then they're going to bring in the hard hitters after your screens are done. So the goal is, and my strategy going into this game is I'm going to make it as hard for my opponent as possible to make good trades with his units. His units are going to be more expensive than mine, so as long as I can leverage that properly, then it'll be no problem. So I'm going to go through the list with you guys and kind of talk about what the strategy is and how I'm going to use the units. And maybe this will actually help you guys be able to develop a plan against armies like Blood Angels and World Eaters and stuff like that. And we'll talk about all those things briefly. I personally don't have a problem with World Eaters. I actually think they're easier to deal with than Blood Angels because a lot of their stuff just doesn't have fly except for Angron. Yes, Angron's a problem, but your list should be able to deal with something like Angron if it's charging right at you, right? But again, I mean, there's a little bit of luck involved because Angron can resurrect himself as well. So, unfortunately, that is a thing. Anyway, okay, so let's go into the list. So first, oh, one more thing before I start. I am using a new app because it was brought to my attention that Battlescribe may not be the best on the eyes. So I'm actually using New Recruit. And I have to say, guys, New Recruit, I already like it way better than Battlescribe. It looks cooler. I got this cool battleship in the background, which is awesome. I like the dark tone to it so that, you know, the list shows up in white. It's just much easier on the eyes. My phone, I actually use a dark background on my phone because of that. So I really enjoyed this a lot. And I think it's a lot more user-friendly as well. So I am using New Recruit for this. And for all my list videos in the future, I am going to be using this program. So shout out to New Recruit for making a very superior list building system. That's also updated as well. Okay, so starting off, we have Fuegan. Now, I want to kind of mention Fuegan in, and the way I'm going to use him in this list. He's going to be run solo. He's not going to be run with the Fire Dragons. Now, the reason for this is because we need to make sure that every single trade we make is as efficient as possible. So what that means is that I'm not going to ever be in a position where I'm going to want to throw out Fuegan and the Fire Dragons together against one target that's not something like a Land Raider. Unless it's like a Land Raider, I don't want to waste Fuegan, right? If I'm going against, for example, 5 Death Company Marines, I'm going to throw out 5 Fire Dragons against it. I'm going to shoot my Falcon at them, and my Fire Dragons are going to blow up the rest. That's kind of how I see it. That's how I'm going to make an efficient trade. If I throw Fuegan out there as well, then they can retaliate against both of those units at the same time and kill both of them. Fuegan basically has 2 lives, and he can very easily one-round a unit of 5 Death Company. Now, some of you might be thinking that Death Company are overpowered or they're super strong or whatever it is, and they're very strong in melee, no doubt. They're re-rolling all of their hit rolls, which is insane, right? And they also get to take Thunderhammers if you want to. So you have a unit with Thunderhammers, re-rolls all hits, they have stratagems to boost their damage even further. They're mean, right? And they can definitely kill anything they hit, basically, especially in big units. However, in small units, Fuegan can come out, shoot them with his beam profile, or the dispersed profile, basically not the lance one, but the other one that's good against Marines. And he can kill quite a few of them. Now let's actually look at that profile, and I'll show you guys what I'm talking about here. Yes, it's called the beam profile. So it's range 12, has 3 attacks, hits on 2s, strength 8, so it's wounding on 2s, it's AP -3, so it's forcing a 6-up armor save, and it has 2 damage a pop, and it's sustained hits a D3, which is all good, right? You could even use a fate dice on one of these to, boost this if you wanted to. So that can kill quite a few Marines, and then he also, in combat, has the Fire Axe with 6 attacks, hitting on a 2+, strength 5, which will wound on 3s, AP -4, it's giving them no save at all, and damage 3, which is a big deal, because Death Company have a 6-up feel no pain, which isn't nothing. So he can kill a unit by himself, and that will make up his points right there. So that's a positive trade already. Now, on top of being able to make up his points, a lot of you might come back and say, well, they have Fight on Death, right? A stratagem to Fight on Death on a 4-up. That's the thing, though, guys. If it's a small unit like Death Company, like, I'm going to be shooting and probably killing 2 of them right off the bat before I charge in. They're only going to get 3 dice to roll against me to see who fights back, right? So they're going to roll their dice. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say that 2 are able to hit and they Fight on Death. So Thunderhammers are probably going to be the best thing against Fuegan. I doubt anybody's going to take much else on the jump pack Death Company, because they're just the best option, right, against most targets, especially against other Marines, because you have to also understand that, yes, your opponent can give them all hand flamers and stuff like that, which are really good against Eldar, but is your opponent that is going to be playing in a tournament really going to bring all hand flamers just to fight against an Eldar opponent, right? Just in case they get that one Eldar matchup. Maybe one of their units has it, but most of them aren't. So they get their 6 attacks back, hitting on a 4+. They do get rerolls, so 6 goes to 3. You get rerolls. Maybe you get an additional hit. Since I gave them the benefit of the doubt on the Fights on Death, let's assume that they get 1 less hit. So 4 hits total, and then they wound on a 2. So maybe they wound them all 4, right? Yeah, let's assume that they wound them all, but maybe they don't get a devastating wound. So Fuegan has, I believe, 5 wounds, if I'm not mistaken. Let's just double check real quick. 5 wounds, right? So I'm going to make 2 of those invul saves, no problem, and I'm going to be left on one wound anyway. So that, on average, Fuegan will live, and he'll still have his, basically revive ability left. And that's basically what I wanted. My opponent has literally done nothing to stop me from being able to trade effectively, even though they use that stratagem to fight on death. So yeah, in that scenario, Fuegan basically trades up, and my opponent wastes his command point trying to fight on death. A really good opponent is not even going to try to fight on death with a unit like that. At least a unit of 5 that's, just not going to be able to cut it to kill him. Against a bigger unit, I'm going to shoot that unit first with something else to soften it up before Fuegan goes in to deliver the final blow. I'm not just throwing Fuegan into a unit of 10, right? So there's a little bit of strategy in that. So Fuegan is a good choice against Blood Angels. There's nothing bad about him. He's awesome. Okay. Oh, and, by the way, the shooting that Blood Angels have is really bad. I know that most Death Company can take Infernus pistols, but again, it's going to be very rare that your opponent actually does this to any serious degree, because then they can't take the Thunderhammer. Right? So I think they have the option of taking, if I'm not mistaken, Death Company Intercessors, which have this, ability to basically get free Overwatch. But even then, they're probably not going to be taking they're probably not going to be taking a bunch of Infernus pistols. Again, I may be wrong there, but I don't think so. Anyway, and it's only 6 inches also, so if you're charging into them and you're just outside of 6, they're not going to be able to overwatch you or anything like that. So, yeah. Okay, so that's Fuegan. Then I got the Solitaire. The Solitaire is there for one purpose only. He's just going to hang out near my other units on the first turn of the game to heroically intervene. Because if my opponent wants to charge me with that first wave, I'm going to say one of your units is going to die. That's basically what I'm going to put to my opponent. One of your units is going to die, and I'm not going to have to deal with that in my own turn. And what that will do is that will open up the field a little bit so that I can strike back at some of his second wave. And if you can strike back at a second wave and eliminate enough of those second wave units, then you won't have to worry as much about the clap. Which, what I mean by the clap is, if you ever played a game and on turn 2 when your opponent sets up all their stuff and then you don't have anything to deal with the units that they're staging on you, and then you move up and then your opponent just wipes out a bunch of your units, right? I've seen it so many times. I've done it myself so many times with the Eldar. The Eldar are arguably one of the best factions to do this because we have a lot of hard hitters, right? So the Solitaire is there for that. He's going to heroically intervene. And then in my own turn, I'm going to charge another unit and kill them. Now again, fights on death. Absolutely. My opponent can fight on death. But if I'm heroically intervening, killing a unit of, maybe Assault Intercessors, right, with my heroic intervention, Solitaire, and then I'm going and I'm killing a unit of Death Company, that Solitaire is making an excellent trade, right? So playing the Eldar, and I know a lot of people don't think Eldar are good at trading, but, in a vacuum, if you just have an Eldar unit versus a Marine unit, yeah, the Marine unit's going to win every time. But games are not in a vacuum typically, right? There's strategy involved, there's stratagems, and yeah, I may lose my Solitaire to a fights back, especially against, Thunderhammers. That tends to end a Solitaire pretty quickly if you're not lucky. But yeah, I mean, I technically guess he could survive, right? Because of the 3+ invul save, and if you're a little bit lucky, maybe you put a fate dice in there, maybe your opponent doesn't roll any dev wounds, you could survive. But yeah, most likely he'll die, but guess what? He's going to be trading up significantly. And at the end of the day, it's all about killing more units than your opponent has, and then being able to use the rest of your army to score on objectives and everything like that. So that's the Solitaire. The next character is the Autarch Wayleaper, and he's kind of similar in a way. He does have the Phoenix Gem as well, so he's kind of a character that I'm going to use as a little bit of a bait. Because what he's going to be able to do is revive himself on a 2-up, right? So if my opponent throws a unit of... well, I won't use Assault Intercessors, but, maybe Death Company or something, because I don't think Assault Intercessors can kill him, to be honest with you, if he's fighting first, because he has the Banshee Mask. So, unit of Thunderhammers, though, definitely will put him down, but he has the Phoenix Gem. So when my opponent kills him, he resurrects, and then of course I'm going to shoot those Death Company and kill them. Right? Pretty easily too. And the Autarch's going to be alive. So again, my characters are behaving in such a way as where they're all trading up against my opponent, no matter what he does. Right? Okay. So, of course, also the Autarch Wayleaper is just really good in general, giving you the command points and stuff like that, which is going to be important for this matchup. I do have a Farseer Skyrunner. His job is just to stick with the Windriders, because they're going to be my cleanup crew. Anytime I need to shoot something after it's killed one of my units, Windriders have the movement and the damage to put them down. And it really doesn't matter what it is. If your opponent is running, the more competitive Death Company, then they're still going to die. I know they have the Feel No Pains, but you have a full, like in this list, for example, I have a Farseer Skyrunner, I have Guide, I have a Warlock Skyrunner to ignore cover, and then I have a bunch of Shuriken Cannon Windriders, like 9 of them. And a 9-pack is just going to be able to obliterate pretty much a whole unit of Space Marines. Like, I'd be surprised if there was one left after the volley's done. Like, even with the 6-up Feel No Pain, they're going to suffer some really hard hits. Yeah, so if my opponent is running a big unit of 10, they can take them out. If my opponent's running a unit of 5 or maybe multiple 5s, maybe I can position them in such a way to where they kill one unit, but then in the next turn they can overwatch another unit possibly as well. And again, this is a unit that I can also, if I want to, fire and fade. Okay, so that's why the Farseer Skyrunner's in there. But, Guide is typically a pretty good ability. Warlock Skyrunner's there for the ignores cover. And I could have put a unit of Rangers in there instead of this guy for some extra screening, but I kind of felt like I did need to ignore the cover because, armies, especially melee armies nowadays, they typically have Feel No Pain, and they typically have, things like Armor of Contempt. So I wanted to at least ignore cover to put my opponent in a position where they would have to use that extra command point to use Armor of Contempt. And guess what, guys? That means that's one less command point they get to use for stratagems like Fight on Death, right? So the less my opponent can fight on death, the better. That's how I figured it, and that's how I kind of justified the Warlock Skyrunner. Now, I do have a unit of Storm Guardians. Now, I like Storm Guardians. Do I run them in every one of my lists? Well, pretty much, yeah. And I think the reason for it is because, again, I really like the concept of sticky objectives. It allows me to be a little bit more flexible with certain units, allows me to be more offensive when I need to be. But the Storm Guardians actually have another purpose, and that's move blocking. Now, to give you an example, this unit would probably beat a unit of Assault Intercessors if it got the jump on them. So, move up, fire the 2 Flamers, fire the 2 Fusion Guns, charge in. Storm Guardians are going to beat them. They will not beat Death Company, but they can do some good damage to Death Company if they get the drop on them. They can kill a couple models in the unit and then tie them up. And we're assuming that that unit doesn't have a character in it. I know a lot of Blood Angels players bring, Lamartiz or Astropath or Astrogoth or some weird thing, right? Some guy with a big axe, I know that. So, yeah, those characters will overpower the unit of Storm Guardians. But again, the Storm Guardians are mostly there to just tie something up, screen for you, and make sure that your other units can trade better. And at the same time, give you a sticky objective. Maybe give you a raised banner or something like that. Perform a secondary. Useful things like that. So that's why they're there for the most part. And they're only 100 points now, and I think they're pretty much a steal for what you get. Okay, for my other units, I have triple Fire Dragon. Now this may come as a shock to a lot of you guys because Fire Dragons did get a points increase. But Fire Dragons are still one of the most cost-effective units in terms of damage to elites. So if my opponent has, and I heard a couple players saying that they were really thrown off by big blocks of Terminators who could advance and charge and things like that. But I'm telling you, if your opponent has a big block of 10 Terminators or ponderously walking up the battlefield, you can screen them until you get a clear shot, and then your Fire Dragons can come out. 15 Fire Dragons will probably kill most of that unit for a fraction of the cost. And yeah, you're leaving your fire dragons open, but the idea behind it is you're also probably going to be killing or at least setting up in such a way that your opponent, if you know they retaliate against the fire dragons, are going to lose those units that they retaliate with. So the fire dragons are in there because, you know, they're a very cost-effective unit for killing things like Death Company. And even, you know, here's the other thing I want to mention real quick as well. And I know this is kind of going off on a little bit of a tangent, but somebody in my melee video talked about this unit, and I didn't really know about this unit too much because I never saw him played. My buddy didn't use them. You know, I never really heard about them, except like I knew they existed, but I thought they were just crap because I've never seen them in actual competitive lists. And those are the Sanguinary Guard. Now, historically, at least back in 5th edition is kind of the last time I saw Sanguinary Guard really being played. And, you know, granted, that could just be because I haven't fought Blood Angels in a seriously competitive way since 5th edition, but Sanguinary Guard was something I didn't even see then, right? Because they were considered too expensive and not worth it. Well, it turns out that they're still really expensive, and they're still kind of crappy. Now, the one thing that they are good at, though, is beating down other melee units, because in melee they get a -1 to hit and a -1 to wound, which is really good. So they're good against other Death Star melee units. But they're just not that good at surviving. You know, they have a 2+ armor save, but they're basically, other than that, they're just Marines, right? Fire dragons will kill them, and they're really expensive. Also, Wind Riders will kill them very easily. They're not a very competitive unit in most settings. They will be good against melee armies, but I don't, to be honest with you guys, and I may be completely wrong, and it may be meta dependent, but I don't see a lot of players in a competitive tournament setting bringing a bunch of Sanguinary Guard because they're afraid of other melee units. Because, again, Blood Angel melee units usually will kill the enemy unit on charge anyway. They're not worried about something having fights first, typically, and that works to our advantage. Okay, so I have the 3 units of Fire Dragons. I also have 2 units of Striking Scorpions. Now, I did consider Rangers, and I think one of the changes I could typically make in this list is I could replace one with the Rangers, and I could maybe add a Weeping Stone onto the Farseer for some extra fate dice. But honestly, I wanted the Fire Dragons because I wanted units that could chip down or possibly even kill units like Assault Intercessors or Death Company, small units. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, Proxy Hammer, come on, 5 Scorpions can't beat 5 Death Company, can they? Guys, if you roll hot on those 6s, I'm telling you right now, 5 Scorpions can rip through 5 Death Company, right? So let me give you an example. Striking Scorpions have 4 attacks apiece, so that's 16 attacks. You're hitting on 3s. You're probably going to get about, let's say you get 3 6s, right? So that kind of offsets your misses a little bit, and you miss 2 total, so maybe you hit like 14 times. Now, typically you're only going to get 2 dev wounds, so that's only enough to kill 1 Death Company Marine. But I'm telling you from real battle experience, I've had times when my Scorpions would roll like 4 or 5 devastating wounds, and then my Exarch rolled 2 6s and got 2 more devastating wounds on a damage 2 weapon, right? It's a lucky roll, but they're cheap enough to where that can easily happen, and that could be a good trade. Also, if the Striking Scorpions only kill 3 Death Company Marines, which is probably about the average that they'll kill, they've still made up their points. So they're still trading up. So 2 units of Striking Scorpions, I think, you know, are good against a lot of these melee armies, even into things like, well, like Thunderwolf Cavalry, right? And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the Mandablaster, if we go down to Mandablasters, yeah, melee weapons equipped by the bearer have devastating wounds when targeting units without the monster vehicle. So, you know, Thunderwolf Cav are beasts, right? I believe they're beasts. So, yeah, your devastating wounds work against those units, and they ignore invulns. So yeah, these guys can trade up against things that you wouldn't think they can trade up against just because of that. And again, they're probably only going to get 2 or 3 dev wounds. You'll get 1 dev wound with the Exarch most likely, and you'll probably get about 2 dev wounds with a normal unit. So maybe you kill 2 models, and then, you know, the rest of the attacks have to go against, you know, their armor save, which maybe you kill another one. But again, even if you kill 3, you're trading up, and that's my whole point, is that when you're playing against armies like this, it's good to trade up. Now, what if the enemy gets the first turn, right? Striking Scorpions get charged, they get killed. That is true, but if you position your Striking Scorpions in such a way that your opponent is then visible to your other shooting units, or in range of your, you know, then, or in range of your, you know, shooting or melee units, then again, it's fine, because his units, or her units, are going to be much more expensive than the Striking Scorpions. Assault Intercessors with jump packs are 80 points. That's 15 points more. I know it's not that much of a difference, but it's still a difference. Death Company, though, are 140 points. If your opponent has to use Death Company to kill your Striking Scorpions, then I'm sorry, but you're going to be trading up, and you've probably already won. A good player will not trade for that, right? But what they will do is they'll send Assault Intercessors in there, and they'll charge in, and they'll probably kill about 2 on the impact from their ability, and then they'll probably kill the rest with attacks. Maybe the Exarch will live and kill one in return, but probably not, right? And then you can wipe up the unit with, you know, relative ease. But if you do get the first turn, then your Striking Scorpions can charge into, you know, Death Company, Intercessors. They can really put a damper on your opponent's plans and kind of force them into a position to where the rest of your army can stage, can position themselves effectively, so you have room to maneuver, and you have the ability to dictate where your opponent goes and what units your opponent has to use to be able to break out of the situation they find themselves in. So that's why I'm going with the Striking Scorpions versus the Rangers. That's the idea of it against these melee factions. But again, you know, Rangers would be better against something like World Eaters, right? Which are mostly on foot. Rangers having the D6 move means they can screen easier. So basically, also, Rangers are probably better if you go second. So my thinking of it is, I could have 1 unit of Rangers, 1 unit of Scorpions, but then if I do go first, then I'm kind of halving my potential. And if I go second, then at least the Striking Scorpions can still screen and give my opponent something to think about and something to charge. If I position them correctly, my opponent either has to charge them and reveal himself or his units, or my opponent just doesn't go after them and then takes the charge, which they're not going to do. So that's the idea behind the double Scorpion. I hope that makes sense. I know I don't have the ability to show it on a board yet, but I am working on maybe being able to show you guys how to position some of these things on Tabletop Simulator. Okay, moving on from the Striking Scorpions, we got Swooping Hawks. 1 unit. Now the reason why I don't want to go all in on Swooping Hawks is really they're just action monkeys to me. They are good in certain matchups. They do certain, you know, good damage in certain matchups against certain targets, but they don't do good damage against power armor. So, you know, and typically speaking, a lot of the armies that I've been playing are power armor armies. So Swooping Hawks, I love them, but because they're a little more expensive now, they're not the 75 points they once were, you know, I typically just take 1 unit, score on objectives with them, and that's my dedicated objective unit. They're also good at screening, and against Blood Angels who can, you know, charge out a deep strike, good screens are something you really need. Now that's another thing I want to mention. A lot of players mention, well, you know, Blood Angels get a reroll charges out of deep strike, right? Because the Death Company can do that. And they also get +1 to charges if they're in a certain detachment. Now, that's true, but you can still screen them out, right? They don't have a 3-inch deep strike that they can charge afterward. So you don't really have to worry about that. So what that means actually is that if you screen properly with some of your units, they're not going to be able to actually do much. Now, another point I want to make, and I'll talk about this later when we get into the vehicles that I chose for the Fire Dragons, which of course are Falcons. Even the Devastating Wound Thunderhammers are not that effective at dealing damage to vehicles. typically speaking, right? So Falcons, yeah, I mean, maybe a Falcon dies to it, but then at most your opponent's making an even trade with it, even if they roll. So that requires a good roll, first of all, but it just leaves them open to attack. So at best, your opponent is making an even trade with you. At worst, your opponent's failing to kill the Falcon, you fall back and shoot with feigned retreat, and then your, opponent's unit dies. So using the Falcons in this list is a really good way to break up and to actually block off places where your opponent can deep strike as well. Also, the use of ruins and placing your units in ruins to the point where your opponent can't just charge into the wall and fight you is another great ability. So basically, if you guys don't know, GW has clarified in the last balance patch of Pariah Nexus that units actually can stay a little bit farther than 1 inch away from the ruin wall so that your opponent's model's base cannot fit inside of it, and because your opponent's models cannot be in between a wall, basically, end a move on top of a wall or between it or whatever you want to say on the first story, then they can't fight. So to make the charge, they're going to have to roll bigger numbers to go all the way around the ruin. That's really big. And this is what I'm talking about by using striking scorpions in a way where your opponent either has to charge all the way around and reveal themselves, or they just don't charge and they fail. And then your striking scorpions have it. And because typically speaking, at least from my experience, I haven't seen Blood Angel armies really take infiltrators, right? So because they don't really need them. So you kind of get the advantage on that. Okay. So anyway, yeah. So yes, they can deep strike, obviously. But the other thing to mention, or the other thing to kind of think about, is that if your opponent is using, like, let's say they put 500 points of stuff in deep strike. That's 500 points of their army that is not on the battlefield on turn 1. So that makes your opponent's first wave a lot more easy to deal with. Makes it a lot easier to deal with. And in addition to that, you can screen out their second wave much easier. Even if they're getting +1 to charge, even if they're rerolling their charges, they're still not going to be in a position, if you screen and position yourself correctly, to be able to kill more than their points are worth. I do have 5 warp spiders as well. And again, warp spiders are just good, right? They're really good in Pariah Nexus. I was thinking of taking 2 units in this army, but I thought that I could get away with 1 unit. And basically the idea behind these guys is they can just walk up to a, unit of Death Company or something like that, shoot them, do some mortal wounds, do some damage, maybe kill half the unit of 5, and then, once that Death Company moves, they overwatch them and kill the rest. If my opponent makes it into combat with the Sergeant or something like that, then I have the Exarch with a power weapon that can put him down. Yeah, maybe they kill a couple warp spiders. Okay. But then my warp spiders kill them, and I've made a good trade, right? And again, once again, the list is all about making good trades with your opponent. Okay, moving on. We got the Shroudrunners. Shroudrunners are just there to give lethal hits. There's some targets that you might go up against that are tougher than, normal. Your opponent can still have access to things like aggressors if they want to run those. Lethal hits with Wind Riders are very good at putting down aggressors. Or just tanks, right? Ball Predators. Your opponent can run Ball Predators with a Flamer, Torrent Flamers. Those are really powerful, and you should have a plan against those. Now, in my particular list, my plan is just this. They're going to reveal themselves at some point. They're probably going to toast a unit of, maybe they toast Striking Scorpions, or maybe they, toast, something that's out there like Swooping Hawks or something like that. But then they're going to reveal themselves, and I have 3 Falcons to deal with them, right? I can always pop out Fuegan. He can kill one, basically one-shot it by himself. They're 125 points apiece. They are very cheap, but, they're not necessarily that fast. They do get to advance, but their rule only allows them to get assault weapons against infantry. So if they're shooting at things like Wind Riders, they can't advance and shoot Wind Riders. They can't advance and shoot Shroudrunners. The other thing about the Shroudrunners is they're very good at move blocking, right? So turn 1, I can scout up, I can move right in front of, basically the positions where the ball predators are going to go through, and I can block my opponent from being able to shoot most of my units back, which is going to be important, especially if I get first turn. So yeah, Shroud Runners are in there for that reason, but they can also score objectives and things like that as well at the same time. So they're not just being thrown away, they're actually scoring and they're blocking stuff. Got the unit of 9 Wind Riders, of course, and I talked about why I'm going to put that unit in there, just, to basically deal damage to big units of Marine equivalents, essentially. And then I got the 3 Falcons to kind of round out the list, and they're armed with the Pulse Laser, Bright Lance, Shuriken Cannon combo, and they have the Fire Dragons in them. Also, another thing, if for whatever reason this comes up, it probably won't, but, I do have the Solitaire, so if there was a situation where my Solitaire somehow lives, I could put him in a Falcon and throw him out against some other unit. Probably won't happen that way, but you never know, right? If I need some extra threat range with the Solitaire on turn 1, and I feel like I need that if I'm going to get first turn, I can definitely throw the Solitaire in that. And then I get first turn, I dump him out, use Blitz or whatever, and just go right for the enemy's throat. That's a possibility as well. So yeah, that's the list. And basically it's a mix between combat, right? I have my Striking Scorpions for close combat. I have also these, well, Storm Guardians aren't really close combat, but they can kind of deal some damage in close combat. And then I got my Solitaire and Fuegan as well, which are, Fuegan's definitely a combat unit and a range unit in one. Solitaire is a combat unit. Autarch Wade Leaper can mix it up as well a little bit, just not as effectively. So I have my combat units here. I have my Fights First unit. I have a unit that can trade with, enemy Death Company and stuff like that and live. And then I got my shooting, which is a lot. So this is I would consider this something like a balanced list where I have, 3 or 4 combat units in it, and then I have a bunch of shooting, and then I have things that are going to be able to score me objectives and screen. So I think overall, this is something that I ran something very similar to in, I want to say Leviathan, obviously, right? I ran something very similar to this, but I didn't have the Solitaire. I didn't have the Wind Riders. Those are additions that I think are going to be good in a very marine-heavy meta, so I added those in. Now, you will notice something about this list, though. A lot of you may say, well, what's your primary objective game, Proxy Hammer? And the truth is, my primary objective game is going to be either a secret mission, or I'm simply going to wait out my opponent, and I'm going to just score as much primary as I can while destroying their units. So my goal is I destroy their units first. I prioritize that first, right? Turns 1, 2, and 3 are going to be dedicated to eliminating as many units and trading up as much as possible. And then during 4 and 5, I'm going to go ahead and score the rest of my primary once all my opponent's units are dead. So that's the idea behind this list. And I think it plays best with secret missions because, I have a Way Leaper here that's, has a Phoenix Gem. He can easily score on command insertion. I have units that are tough enough in the later stages of the game to score on things like, Unbroken Wall, right? Falcons particularly. I know some of you guys are going to think that's a joke, but I'm serious, especially against a melee army. There's not a lot of things Blood Angels can do outside of their units that I'm going to kill in the first couple turns to kill a Falcon in the late game. Like, there's just not. Like, they're going to have what left, right? They're going to have some units in the backfield to use to kind of take their home objective and secure their home objective. Maybe they have, regular intercessors back there for sticky. Maybe they have a Dreadnought or something, like a Ballistus Dreadnought back there to shoot. Maybe, again, they have triple Predator with Last Cannon. I don't know. Maybe they don't even use Ball Predators, right? I don't know how competitive Brawl Predators are. I'm just assuming that Blood Angel players are using them because I looked at them and I was like, oh, cool, they're pretty fast, pretty good cost. But, people could just be using the Predator Annihilators in competitive play. And if they have those, they're probably going to die, right? But even so, right, Triple Falcon with the infantry that I have, Wind Riders can hold an objective late game. I can technically score on Unbroken Wall if the conditions are correct. And if I eliminate all my opponent's battle line units, I can score on War of Attrition with the Storm Guardians, right? So if they survive. And again, this is all dependent on the first 2 turns of the game, how that goes, whether or not I'm going to use a secret mission. But, I mean, most likely, at the very least, my Way Leaper is going to be alive, and there's not going to necessarily be enough in my opponent's backfield to be able to deal with this once I advance forward in the late game. Anyway, that's the theory behind this list. It's basically a trading list that focuses mostly on the late game, and the secret missions probably are going to be pretty easy to score. But again, this is the first time I'm running this list, and I'm running it into Blood Angels, and Blood Angels are really strong right now, so I don't know how it's going to go, but that's the game plan. So I wanted to kind of talk with you guys about what my thoughts were on how to deal with these types of armies and stuff like that. And I don't think I explained it quite good enough in the video I did on melee armies versus the kind of melee Eldar build, because I basically made it seem like, you know, a lot of the melee units just traded up, and I didn't really go into detail about how to position them correctly. And I think hopefully now you guys have a better idea of how to maybe build a list against Blood Angels that can actually work, right? I do think Eldar melee is something that can work against Blood Angels, but I think the margin for error is very slim, because if you start trading down with your units, it could be difficult, right? I mentioned Howling Banshees, by the way, earlier in my other video. Howling Banshees are a good unit against them too, honestly. And if you don't believe me, just do the math on 5 Howling Banshees hitting against a unit of 5 Death Company, right? Howling Banshees are half the cost. They cost 70 points versus 140. Howling Banshees can kill, guaranteed, can kill 3 Death Company Marines with a reroll to hit and a reroll to wound on the Exarch, which, by the way, guys, you always want to make sure to save those rerolls for the Exarch Banshee. They're probably going to kill 3 on average. And then your opponent strikes back with 2, and again, they're rerolling all their hits, which is great, but they're hitting on 4s. 5 if you want to pop lightning fast, although I wouldn't. So they're hitting on 4s, rerolling, and the math is pretty much the same as I spoke of before. They're going to hit 3 times base, and then they're going to reroll. Maybe they hit another, let's just give them the 2 times just because, right? They hit another 2 times. And then on top of hitting 2 other times, sorry, I lost my train of thought. They hit 5 times, let's say, right? And maybe they wound 4. And then you get 4+ invul saves, which you make 2 of them, so you lose 2 Banshees. Even if you lose 3, again, you're winning that trade, right? So when people say Banshees don't do a lot of damage, I'm like, yeah, true, they only kill 3 Marines, but that's all you need to kill to make them cost effective, especially against those more expensive units. 6-up Feel No Pain, again, it's going to save you sometimes, but it's not always going to save you, so you do have to keep that in mind as well. That as much as I'd love to say that 6-up Feel No Pain is really good, and it just, sometimes it comes in really clutch, and then sometimes it just fails and doesn't do anything. Now, another thing that I want to mention to a lot of you guys is, a lot of you guys mentioned the Sanguinary Priests. And what I will say about Sanguinary Priests is that they're good, but they're also 100 points for the Jump Pack Sanguinary Priest. So you're paying 100 points for the Sanguinary Priest for a 5+ Feel No Pain. And that just, I don't think that's worth it on a minimum unit. I think there's better things you can do, especially, I mean, I don't know, again, I'm not a pro Blood Angels player or anything, but if you're a Blood Angels player out there, let me know. Would you actually attach a Sanguinary Priest to a unit of 5 guys that probably already has a 6-up Feel No Pain, or doesn't, but, you know, at that point you're making the squad more than double its cost? I wouldn't attach Feel No Pain to a unit of 5, and if I had a unit of 10, then it's not trading effectively, right? Especially against this Eldar list. Now, the other thing I want to just mention real quick is, let's say your opponent does use a unit of 10 of something, right? Maybe 10 Death Company Jump Pack Marines. So that's going to be 280 points. And maybe they even have Lamartes on there, right? Which I think Lamartes is like, what, another 100? So that's going to be 380 points for that unit. they can only kill one thing in this army. They have to choose, right? They're not going to double charge anything and kill 2 units because positioning wise, it's going to be very hard to do that, especially with the setup. So let's say they charge into a falcon and kill it. Well, okay, that's less than half of what the unit is. The fire dragons are going to get out, and then they're going to shoot at them and trade up there. And the wind riders are going to blow them, rip them a new butthole as well. So it just doesn't make sense, right? I mean, a lot of people were saying in the last video, oh, what if they run these big units of 10? Well, the truth is that, yeah, that's fine. They can run those units of 10, but what are they going to kill? 5 striking scorpions and then just die? Right? Be out in the open and then just get obliterated? The Eldar have the speed to turn corners, especially now with the new pivot rules. Oh my god, Falcons are so much more maneuverable. Right? Even with a -2, if you take a -2 to their pivot, which is probably how you should play it now, the GW has ruled it in one of their tournaments that vehicles with round bases also have a pivot value of 2. I think you should play it like that. I know it's not official or anything. That's probably how you should play it in most games. And you could expect that out of tournaments. Even with that, though, the Falcons are really maneuverable. Wind Riders don't have to pay the tax because they're not vehicles. They just have round bases, so they're good. They don't have to pay anything for pivots. Also, everything is measured from the base of Wind Riders. You don't measure anything from the actual Wind Rider itself. Now, one thing I want to clarify real quick about the Wind Riders. I did tell people, and I think I kind of misspoke a little bit, and I gave people the wrong impression about Wind Riders. When you're deploying Wind Riders, you still have to keep the model itself behind the deployment zone, right? That's in the core rules under deployment. The whole model has to be behind, which includes the Wind Rider. If you see part of the Wind Rider as well, then you can shoot the Wind Rider. However, the point I was trying to make was that if the base of your Wind Rider is behind obscuring terrain, which is ruins, then you can't shoot it because it's obscured, because all distances are measured to the base. So that's why I was trying to, kind of say that they're a little bit easier to hide than you might think. Also, if you turn, I know this is stupid, and it looks dumb on the table too, but if you turn the Wind Rider backwards and you put its back towards the ruin, it's actually easier to hide as well because there's less of a footprint. And if you alternate your Wind Riders, one facing backward, one facing forward, they actually form a rectangle. And you can put them really close together and they actually don't take up that much space. So, and it's funny, actually somebody put something like that in the Discord a while back, like, oh, if you deploy them like this, they have a really low footprint. And I was thinking to myself, it was crazy. That's exactly what I do when I'm deploying my Wind Riders. I just put them in this little rectangle, and it's really easy to even hide a unit of 9, right? So, yeah, it's easy to hide them. It's easier than you think. And they take up less space than you think. Even with the Farseer and even with the Warlock Skyrim, it's less than you think. Even so, though, it's not also a bad thing against an assault army to deploy them out in the open, because assault armies really don't have a ton of shooting. And again, the only thing that really would be a fear for Wind Riders is something like the Ball Predator with the Flamestorm Cannon, which is, that is a big threat. It does damage too, it ignores cover, it auto hits. It's pretty strong. But the other good thing about this is that it's only 18 inches of range, and like I said, if you screen them out with something like Shroud Runners, they're not going to be able to hit you because of the short range. They're not going to be able to actually get line of sight on you and move past the Shroud Runners. So there are things you can do against this. So I guess basically what I'm saying is that really what it comes down to is just being aware of your units, where they are in the battlefield. If your opponent has the angles to shoot you, Blood Angels and other assault armies aren't going to have a ton of shooting, so you don't have to worry as much about that, especially if you screen. And then by using your units to trade up against your opponent, you can essentially cripple their ability to fight back. And let me just give you a quick example. During turn 1, 2, and 3, if you're able to kill You know, there are 3 units of assault jump pack intercessors, 3 units of death company, and like maybe a couple of their transports and stuff, or you know, maybe a couple of other things. I mean, that's over the course of 3 turns. Like, they're not going to have a ton left. You know, they're going to have like, you know, if they're bringing Terminators, or if they're bringing, you know, a big unit of Death Company and Land Raider, you know, maybe that's still alive, but it's like screened out for now. I mean, by turn 3, it should probably be dead as well, just because we have so much anti-large in this list. But if you can kill all that stuff in their first and second wave, turn 4 and 5, it's just, you're just cleaning up their backline, and they're not going to have much to deal with that, you know, to be able to deal with you at that point. So, oh, and the other thing I want to mention too, just because it's relevant, the Wind Riders can overwatch things out of Deep Strike. So if your opponent wants to charge Wind Riders with something, you can just say overwatch and just blow it out of the water. Right? You're re-rolling all hits with Guide. Hopefully you get Guide off and you don't roll the 1. But if you get Guide off, you know, you have 27 shots coming out of this, plus the Farseer, plus the Warlock who has a Torrent weapon. And yes, your opponent will be within 12 for you to fire the Torrent weapon. You're re-rolling all your hits, you're getting sustained hits, and then you're wounding on 3s. With like a bunch of AP. Like AP -2 on the Farseer and like AP -1 on the regular Wind Riders. So, I mean, guys, that's really powerful. That's really strong. Not a lot's going to survive against that. So again, just keep those things in mind, that we have a lot of tools in our army to be able to deal with melee armies. It really just comes down to the terrain and the setup, but it really does help to get first turn, obviously. If you can't get first turn, though, you know, you can at least screen out to the point with your striking scorpions and infiltrators, to the point where your opponent either has to kill them, or again, if they fly over them, then they're going to have to at some point deal with the striking scorpions, which do trade considerably up. And again, there's nothing in this army that your opponent can kill, besides probably Storm Guardians. I think that's probably the weak point of this list, is that if your opponent gets some good melee unit into combat with Storm Guardians, which will probably be pretty hard, because on the first turn they're going to be on your home objective. But if they can somehow get into combat with these guys, like Assault Intercessors can get into them, then yeah, they'll probably trade up against them, right? But also maybe not. You know, maybe they don't kill all 10. And then their Assault Intercessors, you know, you just fall back with the Storm Guardians, who cares? And the Assault Intercessors are going to die. But really, other than that, there's no unit they trade up against that you can't protect. Excuse me. So yeah, that's the list. I wanted to run through it, talk about my ideas with you guys. You know, I know the win rates and stuff like that in tournaments aren't looking the greatest for, you know, certain, you know, for us in particular, and they're looking really good for Blood Angels. But also keep in mind that, you know, Eldar are a finicky army. A lot of Eldar builds that are out there are just not going to do good against Blood Angels. I mean, you know, in general, not all the time, but in general, I don't think a lot of the classic Eldar builds are going to be that good against them. However, I do think we have the tools to beat them. So we'll see tomorrow. I have a game against my buddy tomorrow. We'll see how that goes. I'll let you guys know about it. This is kind of a pre-video for that. And then later this week, I will have the, you know, how to beat Blood Angels video out as well. Hopefully, I'm crossing my fingers. Hopefully I don't lose the game horribly. I don't think I will, though, with this battle plan. So we'll just have to see. In any case, though, even if I do lose the game, I will have learned a lot, and I will be able to kind of guide you guys a little bit better on how to beat these guys. But, yeah, we'll just have to wait and see. Alright, everybody, that is going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching. I know this was a little bit of a long list review and stuff like that. Wanted to give you my thoughts on, you know, the list and about my upcoming game, because I did have a few people, again, comment on the videos that Blood Angels aren't as easy as I'm making them out to be. And you guys probably are right. We'll just have to see. But I think, you know, a list like this can be very effective against them. Other than that, I will say that if you want to join our Discord, you can always join our Patreon. And, you know, the thing about the Patreon is it has free trials already activated. So you don't have to actually spend any money on supporting the channel. But we'd love to have you as a Discord member, right? So if you're interested in that, you can sign up for a free trial. You can cancel anytime, and you can join up on our Discord for free. I'm on there. If you ever need questions, at me, at Proxy Hammer. I'll definitely reply and participate in whatever you need help with. I'm very, excited about helping Eldar players and, looking at lists. And, I know it goes beyond lists, strategizing and stuff like that. Even if you have a good list, if you don't position your guys correctly, it could be, devastating for you. And trust me, I've played Eldar long enough. I know that by heart, that it could be very difficult, but it is a learning curve. And for those of you who are getting a little bit frustrated about Pariah Nexus and, melee armies are just annoying you, maybe try out something like this. And I will probably try to go through some tabletop simulator deployments and stuff if I can get it working how I want to show you guys on a future video. So let me know if you guys are interested in that. I'm definitely, more than happy to, kind of illustrate some stuff, positioning for the Eldar and stuff like that. But anyway, getting back to the Patreon thing, yeah, you can join it for free, and that'll give you access to the Discord. So, if you want to do that, join up. That's awesome. And then I am also an Amazon affiliate and have a channel store page as well. So if you want to, get some discounted miniatures on Amazon, I will leave the link in the description. Or if you want to, get some, Eldar inspired apparel on the channel store page, I will also leave the link for that in the description as well. And I'll see you guys next time. Have a great one, everybody. Thank you to all my supporters. You guys are awesome. We've been doing this for, close to 2 years now, and it's just been a great experience. We're almost to 5K subs, so, if you know anybody who wants to get into Eldar, definitely spread the word. We're looking to build the Eldar community, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one, everybody. Peace out.